I woke up in a birthing sack. Panicked and choking on amniotic fluid, I clawed at the fleshy walls, fighting with all my terrified strength to free myself. With a wet, ripping sound, I was dumped onto the muddy cobbles of the street below, twisting my ankle as I landed. Cold rain blasted my naked body clean of the sack's fluid. I tried and failed to get to my feet. The street was alien to me, an insane medley of architecture ranging from the modern to the prehistoric. The sky above boiled with storm clouds, illuminating my surroundings with non-stop flashes of lightning. And a man walked over to me. His hair was matted with filth, and the rain streaked down his mismatched leather clothes. He said nothing. He just watched me squirm on the floor. "Please!" I gasped. "Help me!" He answered by slamming a foot down onto my face, breaking my jaw and making my vision real. He moved onto my limbs, snapping and tugging until he heard the bones snap. Crippled, naked, and screaming. There was nothing I could do to defend myself when he started to eat me alive. My introduction to hell wasn't unusual. Very few people survive their first hour, let alone their first night. When they die, they go through the same thing all over again, emerging from a new birthing sack in another part of the city. And eventually, they learn to attack the first person they see, and if they're lucky, they'll be able to kill that person. That's the one rule of hell. The strong take from the weak. Get used to that idea and you just might make it through the afterlife. I'm going to give you a helping hand. Consider this your handbook to hell, a primer on the inferno. Make no mistake though, I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. When you die, you'll owe me one. Don't worry about finding me. I guarantee we'll run into each other eventually. Eternity is a long fucking time. So it's really a matter of when rather than if. Do as I tell you, and you'll have a better chance than most of avoiding my own nasty introduction to the pit. Welcome to hell. Some people swear they saw a light at the end of the tunnel when they died. To my mind, those people either hallucinated or they're lying. Most of us wake up in a birthing sack a few minutes after death. The buildings of hell are covered in the things, horrible yellow-brown pimples growing out of brick. I've already mentioned that the first thing you need to do is claw your way out and get ready to fight. This is where the real bitch of the situation comes into play, since not everybody has the strength to break through their sack's flesh. You get the body you had just before you died, see? So let's say you were born disabled, or maybe you died too young, or too old. Tough shit. You're gonna have a rough eternity drowning in birthing fluid over and over. If you manage to break yourself free of your sack, don't waste your time moping around, wondering what the fuck happened. Get on your feet and get ready to defend yourself. Chances are that the person that sees you will be hungry. There are no plants or animals in hell, so cannibalism is really your only option. If you don't fancy starving to death and having to start over, aim to kill the first person you see. Now, it might take a few tries. Most of Hell's residents have been fighting for survival a lot longer than you. They might have armor, have some tanned skin, scavenge metal, and bone. They'll certainly have a shiv, or a club, or an axe. All of that will be useful to you if you can take it from them. The next thing you need to do is find shelter. You see, it never stops raining in hell, and pneumonia is a shitty way to die. Luckily, you'll have a selection of buildings to choose from. You ever wanted to live in a rundown Victorian manor with half a roof and no furniture? How about an ancient Egyptian mud brick hovel? Well, if people have built it, you can find a crumbling, disheveled version of it in hell. Pick a building, kill any squatters you find, and move on. The best houses are the ones that come with a supply of scrap metal and timber. Not only are these good for making weapons, but they're also vital for getting drinkable water. I learned the hard way that hell's rain is teeming with disease. It has to be boiled before it's safe, so getting a fire going and something to make a bowl with is a necessity. So, we've killed our first man, found a home, things are going well. Get that far and you're gonna want to hang on to whatever you have. But you won't. Something will kill you eventually and you will have to start over. My record is a year. If you want to beat that, you'll have to understand hell and its denizens. The damned. The people of hell can be grouped into two categories. The first, the fresh meat, are those who have climbed out of a birthing sack. It's kill or be killed when it comes to fresh meat, always has been, and it always will be. The newly birthed want clothing and tools, and will kill to get a hold of them. The second category, the residents, view fresh meat as a quick and easy supply of food, leather, and bone. Residents have an easier time of it and make sure all of them will fight to remain their resident status for as long as they can. Make no mistake, though, residents victimize each other just as much as they prey on fresh meat. If you're a woman, for instance, well, I hate to say it, but you better get over any hang-ups you have about rape. Women get raped in hell. Far more than men. It's just a fact. If you're not one of those bodybuilders or warrior women, do the smart thing and prostitute yourself for protection. Self-respect does not keep you breathing, I can assure you of that. Remember how you get the body you just had before you died? Well, that fact forms the core of Hell's society. The truth of the matter is that throughout history, it's usually been the men who die in battle. That means that in Hell, there's going to be a lot of men with young bodies fit for war. Don't like it? Tough. Those are the guys who call the shots. If you can't fight them, you better do as they tell you. Now, if you live long enough and fight well enough, you might get invited to one of these resident tribes. These are groups of people who band together for the sake of safety in numbers. And believe me, being a part of a group makes things a whole lot easier in Hell. However, keep in mind that you're only part of a tribe for as long as you're a resident. Get yourself killed, and it's back to being fresh meat. Tribes offer the closest thing to civilized society you'll find in Hell. If you're part of a tribe, you don't have people on your side who will kill you unless shit gets rough. Doesn't sound like much, but that's about as good as it gets. My own survival record was thanks to getting into a tribe. Life was good for a while there. We had about 50 soldiers, and nobody could touch us, and the men abided by the honor code. So the usual fear of being stabbed in the back by your friends wasn't too much of an issue. I could have spent my eternity in reasonable comfort in Hell, but Hell has a way of fucking over a good thing. Human flesh and boiled rainwater doesn't exactly make for a balanced diet, and sooner or later even the strongest resident dies of malnutrition. I did well to last a year in it. In the last few months, though, they were agony. If I believed in God, I'd swear he designed Hell in such a way that nobody stays on top of the food chain for too long. Most of the damned live in Dis, the city of Hell. That's where the fresh meat is born, and considering the size of the place coupled with the short life expectancy, a lot of people tend to spend eternity without even stepping foot outside of Dis. But take my advice. Do not leave the city. Things are rough on the streets, that's true, but trust me when I say it gets a whole lot worse if you try to leave. Dis is surrounded by a wasteland called Gehenna. At first glance, it doesn't seem like much, just an empty expanse of gray stretching out into infinity. Sometimes the damned lose fire in the belly, their will to survive, and set off wandering into Gehenna. Most of them never come back. I made the walk myself once, a very, very long time ago. I don't care how hard you think you are, spend enough time in Hell and it starts to break you. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm a good person who never deserved this. Nobody could say that and not be a liar. I'm not evil, though, or rather, I wasn't. Not until I got to Hell. You murder, rape, and torture because you know they do the same to you. You are murdered, raped, and tortured because they know you do the same to them. Give it long enough and you just won't want to face it anymore. That's when you take the walk into Gehenna. The first couple of miles I walked with nothing special. The rain stopped after a while and the sludge beneath my feet gave way to wet gray ash, and I caught my first glimpse of the Hell's sky beyond the clouds. It was a flat gray and white sun, completely devoid of beauty or warmth. I trudged on. While walking through Gehenna, I lost any urge to eat, drink, or sleep. My body started to waste away, but I didn't care. When my skin started to peel away and my bones were exposed, I still didn't care. The further I walked, the hollower I became in mind, body, and soul. I don't know what would have happened if I kept going, and frankly, I don't want to know. Some part of me wanted to live, so I turned back. I walked for days, maybe weeks. When I turned around, this was only a few steps away. I stepped back into the city and my body fell apart completely. When I emerged from my birthing sack, I swore never to step foot into Gehenna again. Now, there are ways to leave Hell. That should be obvious. Otherwise I wouldn't be talking to you, would I? Sometimes the living get it into their heads that they want to talk to the dead. They get their crystals, their incense, and spirit boards in hopes of reaching their loved ones. Most do nothing more than trick themselves into thinking they've made contact. They smile or cry, convinced their beloved granny is playing a harp on a cloud somewhere before they're getting on with their lives. But a few have the skill to actually reach us. They can open a gate between hell and the world of the living that we perceive as a pillar of fire stretching down from the clouds. As soon as one of those pillars shows up, the damned scramble to be the first to get it. You haven't seen the true nature of man until you watch thousands of the damned swarming over each other, kicking and biting and clawing to be the one who escapes. Contacting the dead always results in a bloodbath. Even the most civilized tribes fall apart the instant it becomes clear that one of them can leave. I've left hell twice now. Left my body behind and ridden that pillar of fire up to the clouds. Some people believe that you can be possessed by demons, but let me tell you something. Demons are not real. What the living see as demonic possessions is just one of the damned testing out their new body. And let's face it, if you fought your way through hell to get back to the world of the living, you're not going to be on your best behavior for long. Sooner or later, we take things too far. Our host dies, or their family cave and recruit an exorcist. Then we're fresh out of the birthing sack and on the streets again. I'm gonna go now. When you get to hell, remember my advice, and that you owe me one. Maybe we can form a tribe someday. For the time being, though, I want to see what this new body can do. By now you should have a good idea of what you can expect from hell. You know to kill the first person you see when you fight your way out of a birthing sack. You know how to find clothing, tools, and shelter. You know that no matter what you do, how well you do, someday it's back to being fresh meat. Dis is the biggest city you can imagine. Tribes fight and die for territory, and taking a wrong turn is a fucking death sentence. You'll get a feel for where you should and shouldn't go eventually. Develop the kind of street smarts you'll need to stay a resident for more than a day. Even so, there are places in Dis that you should know about. So, let's do a little sightseeing tour of hell. Maybe the warning will do you some good. So, allow me to tell you about the first time I saw Skin Street. I dropped out of my birthing sack onto the road, stood straight back up, and got myself ready to fight. Nobody was there. Not one single person was out on the street that stretched for miles in either direction. I relaxed, and I took a look around. Most of the streets in Dis are a labyrinth network of buildings. You spend most of your stay in hell paranoid that just around the next corner there's somebody ready to beat you down. Skin Street isn't like that. It's a single straight line with only the rain and the darkness to hamper visibility. I felt more vulnerable there than I have in any other part of Dis. You ever walk into a wide, empty space and suddenly felt exposed? Yeah, imagine also being naked, unarmed, and in hell. Still, I wish I knew what I was supposed to do. The first step was to find some clothing. That's where I learned how Skin Street got its name. Every building, every busted street lamp, gas lamp, was decorated with flayed skin. I'd been in hell long enough by that point not to be too freaked out, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't affect me. In a fucked up kind of way, it reminded me of Christmas. You know? People hanging wreaths and lights from their houses, that sort of thing. I remember the time I spent with my family, with my kids on Christmas morning. Feelings like that get you killed. You have to push them back down, so that's what I did, and I pulled some scraps from the nearest building. If somebody was going to leave clothing material around, I may as well take it, right? Well, I didn't know it, but at the time, every step I took on Skin Street, I was being watched. When the attack came, I didn't even get a glimpse of the guy. Bang! My skull was fractured from an expert swing of a club. Whoever hit me went for my eyes second, and I hit the floor. He stuck his fingers right into my sockets, and I was blind, crying like a baby when he started to peel away my skin. Here's the thing. Some people are fucked up even by hell's standards. The loners, serial killers, stalkers, and psychos, they all make their way to Skin Street in the end. Most of the damned use the whole body of a kill, but Skin Street, They like to take trophies. They leave their ornaments out as bait for the ignorant, skulking in the shadows and waiting for the best moment to ambush. If you find yourself on Skin Street, you're gonna have to think fast. Forget clothing. Forget anything. Just grab a rock, piece of wood, or anything else you can use as a weapon. Stay out of the shadows. Keep checking behind you and get out of there as quickly as you can. You'll thank me later. You're going to get chased in hell. That is unavoidable. And at some point you'll stumble into somebody bigger than you, or you'll find yourself outnumbered. Forget about a fair fight. If somebody can take you down without fighting back, you bet that's what they're going to do. It's easy to lose focus when you're running for your life. You can forget to pay attention to your surroundings, and that, my friend, is the biggest mistake. The outskirts of Perdition Farms are littered with billboards. They promise free food and safety to anyone fucking stupid enough to believe them. The tribes that fight over that particular territory like to herd people off the streets and into the industrial complex they call a home. The good news is that those tribes won't kill you. The bad news is that they're big fans of taking people alive. They've got a project, you see. They've been working on it as long as I can remember. I couldn't tell you who originally decided that hell should have organized food production, only that the idea stuck, and over the years countless tribes have taken it upon themselves to try and make that dream a reality. Get yourself captured by them, and you can look forward to a bit of slave labor. For the most part, Perdition Farm tribes try to make use of birthing pods as a source of food. They force their slaves to harvest them from the walls, grind them up in industrial vats, mix them with blood, body parts, rainwater, and pretty much anything else that could conceivably make a broth. The life of a slave is short. It's brutal, and it's disgusting. Particularly when those slaves are then used as guinea pigs for the latest concoction. You see, amniotic fluid can be drunk if you're desperate, though drinking too much is guaranteed to make you empty your stomach from every available orifice. The flesh of the sacks is a different matter, though. Now, I couldn't tell you exactly what the birthing sacks are. Some people say they're actual flesh, while others swear that they're more like a fungus. What I do know is that they repair themselves over time. Eat some of their flesh, and over the next few days, you'll grow a new birthing sac inside of you. It's a small mercy that you won't live long enough to see it break through your skin. You'll be dead shortly after your stomach bursts anyway. If you're lucky, your days as a slave will end when the tribe decides they want some real meat. Now, they're not stupid enough to test the broth themselves. No, not when there's no shortages of slaves in hell. Look, I can't force you to stay out of Perdition Farms. I can only offer advice. In my opinion, if you think you're being herded there, it's better to take whatever's to hand and cut your own throat. I'd take fresh meat status 100 times before spending another day on the farms. So, maybe you're thinking, hey, I'm the kind of guy who'd join a cult. Is there anything in hell for me? Well, if that sounds like you, then the Boneyard has you covered. You see, there's a certain kind of religious fanatic who really does belong in hell. I'm not talking about the old dears who bake cakes to raise money for the new church roof here. I'm talking about the guys who went to war because, quote-unquote, God commanded it. Who burned women for supposedly consorting with demons, and who saw nothing wrong with child molestation. When those people get to hell, they're too thick-headed to make sense of what happened. I mean, why face reality when you can pretend it's all a test of faith? They all find like-minded folk in the Boneyard. I'm told that at one time the Boneyard was a cathedral surrounded by a cemetery that stretched from horizon to horizon. Maybe that's true. I don't know. These days, it's a shanty town of temples and churches built from materials scavenged from the streets. Everywhere you look, you'll find wide-eyed zealots preaching their own twisted version of redemption and gangs of masked men on the prowl for fresh converts. Mortification of the flesh is the main pastime in the Boneyard. If you listen to the cacophony of sermons, you'll be informed of how the flesh is wicked and must be purged of sin. How lucky we are to be given such a holy duty. How fortunate to be given the opportunity to redeem ourselves before God. The people of the Boneyard have had a long time and plenty of practice when it comes to mastering torture and degradation. I'm not a good person. I've killed, raped, and cannibalized, but I can honestly tell you that I have never been able to dream up some of the crazy shit that goes on in the Boneyard. I wandered in there by accident once, and I have never been able to get what I saw out of my brain. I watched a woman, naked and bound, forced to her knees and violated with iron rods. The preacher sewed her eyes and lips shut in front of the crowd before sawing off his manhood with a piece of slate. And a boy, maybe 14, was publicly crucified. A girl was drowned in shit. An older man had sharpened flint pushed under his fingernails. I could list off 100 other atrocities done in the name of redemption. Just stay away from the boneyard. The people there decided that hell just wasn't hellish enough for their liking. And forget about redemption. Forget about God. The only way out of hell is by riding a pillar of fire and taking over a living body. Focus on that if you want to escape. The damned cannot offer you salvation. The damned only offer pain. I have to leave you soon if I'm going to make the most of my life on Earth. I'm afraid I'm just going to have to skip town. While I've had plenty to keep myself entertained, this body just isn't suitable for a run-in with the police. It's only a matter of time until some nosy neighbor thinks to pick up the phone. With the humidity over the last few days, Mommy and Daddy are already pretty ripe. Here's something you have to understand. Hell is a big place. I've given you fair warning about a few locations I myself have run into, and that'll have to do. Even if I wrote a library's worth of novels solely dedicated to mapping out the distinct locations within Dis, I still couldn't tell you everything about the city. But what I can do is give you a bit of information about the damned. So let's talk about the Slaughterman. Take a moment to think about all the celebrities you know. How many of them do you reckon would do well in Dis? Not many, I'd wager. Perhaps none. Fame and fortune on Earth doesn't count for shit when you're dead. Very few people are strong enough, mean enough, and downright psychotic enough to earn a reputation in hell. Those few who have what it takes are people you never want to meet. The Slaughterman is one of Hell's legends. He's a huge, bearded man with filed teeth, bloodshot eyes, and foam from his lips. Rumor has it that the day he first emerged from a birthing sack, he was unlucky enough to land at the feet of a slaver trade. Well, those tribesmen, they chuckled to themselves and readied their clubs and whips, only too happy to take some fresh meat captive. Outnumbered 12 to 1, naked, unarmed, and brand new to hell, most people wouldn't stand a chance. If you believe the stories, the Slaughterman shrugged off the clubs battering against him and the whips cutting into his flesh as if they were nothing more than insect bites. He picked up the first slaver, put his hand into the man's mouth, and ripped his jaw right off of his skull. He moved on to another, and another, just tearing them apart with his bare hands until the survivors turned and fled. Nobody quite knows for sure who he was in life. I've heard theories, though, the most popular one being that he was the berserker of Stamford Bridge. Supposedly a single Viking held up the English army single-handedly. It didn't matter that he could never win, that he was outnumbered and that his enemies had better weapons and armor. He stood on that bridge and he fought. By the time he was brought down, he'd killed no less than 40 men. Now, I don't know how true any of this is. I've never seen the Slaughterman for myself, and to be quite honest with you, I don't fucking want to. What I can tell you, though, is that people don't become legendary in hell without a good reason. I guess that the only one who knows the truth is the Slaughterman himself, and he isn't saying anything. Since the day he arrived in hell, he's only spoken once. The fleeing slavers heard it as the Slaughterman tore their tribe apart. Naked, bloody, and surrounded by corpses, the Slaughterman looked up to the storm-racked sky and bellowed a single word. Valhalla. How about a little story? See, I wasn't new to hell at this time. I'd made myself some clothes and a wooden club, found shelter, had a big slab of meat roasting over a campfire. The only thing I didn't have was a tribe. The area I'd been birthed in seemed slummy even for Dis, all half-collapsed hovels and mud huts. Iron was scarce, barely enough to make myself a water bowl. All in all, not a good spot for a tribe. My plan, though, was simple enough. I'd have a decent meal, carve myself a shiv or two in case I lost my club, and then find somewhere more or less dry to sleep. After that, I'd set off to look for a tribe. Even the mildest tribal initiations result in a few scars and a broken nose, so I wanted to be as well rested as I could be. Sleep in hell is both vital and dangerous. There's a knack to finding somewhere that's simultaneously sheltered and hidden, with access to an escape route. Even then, you could never get more than a few hours of sleep at a time. In hell, the slightest suspicious noise should scare the shit out of you. And a low, throaty growl definitely counts as a suspicious noise. I leapt out of my impromptu nest of skins and wood, raised my club up, and returned the growl with one of my own. A woman had crept into my building and was staring at me with dilated pupils. She looked to be in a bad way, skinny, naked, and covered with weeping sores, her lips peeled back to reveal several broken and jagged teeth. It took me all but a second to size her up. She'd been living rough for a few days, or weeks. Judging from her protruding ribs and bloated stomach, she was well on her way of dying of starvation. So she was weak, hungry, and didn't even have a weapon. And I told her, I said, "I've already eaten." So I relaxed, gave my club a few practice swings, but I said, there's no sense in letting her go to waste. I took a step towards her and she just bolted, just turned right around and scampered away in a strange animal gait. And I took off after her, certain that I could outpace her. Even if there wasn't much meat on her bones, bones can still be useful. I chased her through a few streets, struggling to keep my footing on muddy ground, and when I finally got close enough to swing my club, she stopped dead. The suddenness just caught me off guard, and I tripped over, losing my club as I fell. And she howled in triumph, a sound that was echoed by a dozen other throats. That day, I learned two things about hellhounds. The people who lose their minds and become a little more than beasts after enduring centuries of hell. Well, firstly, they have the necessary animal cunning to hunt as a pack. Secondly, human teeth and fingernails are perfectly capable of ripping flesh off of a bone. Modern doctors rarely thrive in hell. Academia and reliance on technology don't leave you in the best state to endure the endless violence and brutality. There are exceptions, though. The people who learn to sew their friends back together amid the machine gun fire of the Somme, shamans, witch doctors, and holy men who endured famine and warfare, and survivalists who knew how to cauterize their own wounds in the middle of a forest. Those are some of the people that just might be strong enough to ply their trade to the damned. After all, working knowledge of basic medicine is just one of those things that's a little beyond the meatheads roaming dis. Most of hell's surgeons find a tribe as soon as they're able. Their tools might be crude, but they soon learn to make do. Flint, slate, and shards of glass serve as their scalpels. They make thread from human hair and needles from slivers of iron. Whenever a member of a tribe has an infected sore, a surgeon will be the one to drain the pus. A tribal surgeon could save your life, but they'll do it without anesthetic. Then there are the freelance surgeons, the people who try to go it alone. They make themselves uniform, the theory being that the damned will recognize them if they all look alike. It doesn't really work, but then you can't expect much from logic from people who've lost count of how many times they've died. For one thing, fashions change over time. You see, I'm told that freelancers wore headdresses and bone necklaces at one point. The current trend is to mimic Venetian plague doctors by donning a beaked mask and wearing a long coat of fire-blackened skin. Freelancers are rare. They're very rare, in fact. You'll see thousands of damned for every freelance surgeon you come across. And when you do come across one, be fucking careful. Firstly, surgeons don't get a free pass in hell. The damned are more likely to attack a freelancer than they are to barter their tools, clothes, or slaves in exchange for their services. You can't be certain if a man in a bird mask and a black coat is really a surgeon or somebody who murdered a surgeon and took his clothes. Perhaps they made the outfit themselves in order to draw on the weak and the wounded close. Advertising doesn't always work as well as intended in dis. If the freelancer turns out to be genuine, that does not give you an excuse to drop your guard. Freelance surgeons aren't usually the most stable people. Put another way, freelancers are usually sadistic. Sure, they might stitch you back together and send you on your way. They might also decide it would be more interesting if they stitch you to someone else. They might think paying an arm and a leg for their service should be taken literally. They might turn out to be some wannabe serial killer who's yet to find their way to Skin Street. For each freelancer trying to do a tough job in a tougher place, there are a dozen or so Joseph Mangalas who want to try out their toys on somebody too injured to fight back. Stick with your tribe surgeon, if you're lucky enough to have one, that is. Failing that, learn to patch up your own wounds. Trust me, if you're able to read, you've already got the intellectual advantage over most of Hell's residents. Universal education is pretty recent after all. Freelancers just aren't worth the risk. I'm gonna be honest with you here. I don't actually know if these exist. Cambions, they're called. What I'm going to tell you is something that somebody else told me. It's up to you to decide if it's true or not. Personally, I really fucking hope it isn't. You see, people rape one another in Hell. It happens a lot. If you're not strong enough, it'll happen to you too. The good news for ladies out there is that damned men fire blanks. You'll almost never get impregnated. I say almost never because, if you believe the stories, there is an incredibly slim chance that a couple of those swimmers will be awake and looking for an egg. Just to put this into perspective, we're talking conjoined twins level of unlikeliness here. And that's just conception. The chances of a pregnant woman surviving the full 9 months in Hell probably conjoined triplets level of unlikely. You're talking about a perfect storm of beating the odds here. There's that little thought experiment about the monkey randomly smashing keys on a typewriter that'll eventually produce the complete works of Shakespeare in order if it goes at it for eternity. The result of that perfect storm, of those monkeys with their typewriters, is what people will call a cambion. A child conceived and born in Hell. Now, I'm not saying they exist. I'm only saying that I met someone who swears it's true and that they've seen a cambion for themselves. You see babies in their birthing sacks from time to time. Usually it's just a body. Occasionally you'll see one drowning. Most of the damned ignore them. They wouldn't survive a day on the streets if you could afford to devote your full attention to them. Better to just leave them be. The only really fucked up people cut through the sacks and, well, I'm not going to finish that thought. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. So this cambion, who may or may not have existed, apparently looked like a normal child. It cried, it shat, it sucked its mom's tits, just like a regular baby would. The mother was a part of a tribe, and they'd been able to protect her throughout her pregnancy. Couldn't tell you why. Curiosity, perhaps? Well, when it was born, the whole tribe gathered around to have a look. Among them was the man who told me this story. Somebody I'd meet years later and eventually kill. This man cut the baby's cord and lifted it to his face. Every man in the tribe had raped the mother at one point or another, and he wanted to see if the child looked anything like him. The cambion looked like a normal child in every way but one. Its eyes were dead. Lifeless. Like a doll's. Sure, the kid was alive. It wriggled and cried like a normal baby. Those eyes were open, though. Not scrunched closed like a newborn's baby's eyes should be. Wide open. Empty. Doll's eyes. If that story is true, I don't blame the tribe for killing the child. Something like that just shouldn't exist. Right. I'm done. I have to go. This is the point where people like to have things nicely tied up. A few dragons slain, a few maidens saved. At the very least, you could expect some kind of moral lesson to think it over. I think that, in this case, that sort of thing misses the point. There are no dragons to slay, no morals to learn. We don't live happily ever after. In Hell, the dragons are tortured, and the maidens are raped. There's no grand revelation, no clever twist, no purpose, no redemption, no hope. There is only eternity among our own kind. Hello there. It's been a long time, hasn't it? The last body I had in the living world didn't cope too well with the mind driving it. It's sometimes hard to remember that the lessons you learn in Hell aren't a good fit for the civilized world. When murder is just a normal part of existence, you tend to keep doing it out of habit. The inevitable result is either death or exorcism and a trip back to the city of Dis. Safe to say, I got a bit carried away the last time I was here. After my last taste of freedom, I knew I had to get back out of Dis. My existence ever since I squandered my last toast has been utterly dedicated to fighting my way back to the Pillar of Fire. I had to escape Dis. After what I've seen, I had to escape. This new body seems a little more durable than the last one. Now that I'm back, shall we take another trip to Hell? It rains in Hell. It rains all the fucking time, and that water has to go somewhere. Most of it drains out to Gehenna, where it sinks into the otherworldly ash and apparently disappears. The rest flows either to the sewers beneath the city, or it collects in the Phlegethon swamp. Remember how it's a bad idea to drink the rainwater in hell without boiling it? Well, Phlegethon's water will kill you no matter what you do with it. Even letting the stuff touch your skin can be deadly. You see, the swamp isn't just filled with disease and rot, it's also brimming with chemical waste. One pool might simply be undrinkable, but another might dissolve your flesh. If you're mad enough to travel to Phlegethon, or unlucky enough to be born there, your odds of survival are slim. Phlegethon's waters are inky, black, and it's impossible to tell just how deep a pool is by looking at it. It could be an inch, or it could be a mile. You never know whether or not your next footfall will plunge you into a cloying abyss. Worse still, there are places where the sewers gradually drain water and create unseen vortices, capable of dragging down even the strongest of the damned. To navigate the swamp, you're better off using crumbled buildings as stepping stones. The corrosive water causes wooden supports to wither and collapse, so there's plenty of debris lying around to stand on. Even so, if you don't take it slow and keep your balance, it's easy to sleep and subject yourself to a fucking agonizing death. Last but not least are the wildfires. These are the reason that even the most insane tribes don't try to establish a permanent stronghold in the Phlegethon swamp. All that chemical waste and decaying matter makes the swamp extremely volatile. A lightning strike or a buildup of gases can result in an immense explosion that'll ignite Phlegethon's surface for miles around. And wildfires are fast. I guarantee you that you won't outrun one. Now, the first time you see Cocytus, you could be forgiven for thinking that you've reached the very edge of Dis. The pit is 12 miles wide and several times as deep. At some point in the dim, distant past, a fragile alliance of tribes put their slaves to work digging a quarry. Why they did this is lost to time, but many believe it was an attempt to escape Dis. Perhaps those tribes had hoped that if they dug far enough, they'd eventually tunnel their way out of hell. In my view, the more likely answer is that the tribes were looking for resources. If that's true, then the excavation was a success. Miles below the surface, beneath the rock and dirt, there are caverns filled with veins of iron and copper, so far underground and sheltered from the relentless fucking rain, it's far easier to create a fire hot enough to smelt ore. The value of such a position was not lost on the tribes, and that alliance soon showed just how brittle it was. After a short but savage burst of treachery, the initial settlers of Cocytus all but wiped themselves out. Since then, the pit has been settled and mined countless times. Coordinated efforts in various tribes have transformed the quarry into an abyss. So far, these alliances have been broken, sooner or later. Cocytus has many paths into its depths, and the lower you go, the more labyrinth it becomes. The sprawling caverns shelter entire shanty towns and crude smelting facilities. Some are abandoned, others have been lost to cave-ins, yet there are still plenty of tribes who fight, join forces, and betray one another over the precious ore veins. By this point, you have to be pretty fucking deep to find an untapped vein. This is where Cocytus becomes truly deadly. You see, anybody who thought that they might be able to tunnel out of hell would be sorely disappointed once they learn what lies in the depths. In all these years, after digging for so many miles, not one person has run into a magical portal leading out of Dis. They also haven't run into magma, for that matter. Instead, the deeper you go, the colder Cocytus becomes. I've never been to the very bottom myself. I'm told that down there the air is cold enough to freeze your blood and shatter your skin. Maybe that's true. I could certainly believe it. On the rare occasions I've been to Cocytus, I've always had to turn back once the walls become more ice than rock and narrow walkways become a death trap. If you have the numbers to do it, Cocytus is still a valuable place to settle. Just remember that when hunger, cold, and greed are your constant companions, none of the damned can be trusted. Now, I've told you about the Slaughterman previously, but hell does have other legendary figures, each with their own Serbiquois. The Ripper, the Grim Doctor, the Tyrant, and many more. So far, I've only encountered one of these figures, during my last stay in hell. I came across the Pale Witch. As is always the case with legends, the truth about the Pale Witch tends to get lost amid the superstition. I've heard plenty of theories as to what she is. The Pale Witch is a Striga who has the power of the evil eye. The Pale Witch is a Gorgon whose gaze turns her victims to stone. The Pale Witch is a succubus who entraps the minds of those she wishes to consume. All of that is bullshit. You see, I've seen the Pale Witch, and I know the truth about her. When I first saw her, I didn't realize who I was looking at. She was naked and locked in combat with an armed resident, so I just took her for fresh meat. Here's a tip for you. If you see a resident fighting for fresh meat, kill the both of them while they're distracted. You see, I planned to do exactly that, but something about the fight seemed off. Residents usually have the upper hand in a fight against fresh meat, and this particular bout definitely seemed about as one-sided as it gets. She was naked, whereas he was clad in leather and bone. She was unarmed, whereas he had a club. She was waifish, whereas he was huge. Despite him having the advantage, the resident was clearly terrified of her. You see, the rules of hell dictated that he should have cracked her skull, taken her skin, and eaten her flesh, but that wasn't happening. He was uncoordinated and apparently desperate to escape. Every swing he took was clumsy, and the blows he did manage to land on her didn't seem to have any kind of effect. I could only stare as this naked, vulnerable woman took the resident's club from his unresisting hand and swung it at his knee. I'm accustomed to the sound of bones breaking by now, but this time the noise caught me off guard. How the fuck was this happening? She brought the club down on his other knee, then his elbows, then his ankles, then his shoulders. She left him broken, screaming at the floor. She could have finished him off with a blow to the head, stolen his clothing, taken her rightful place as resident. That's how hell works. Those are the rules, and I've learned them through bloody trial and error. But that isn't what happened. Rather than kill him, she sat down beside him in the mud and took his hand in hers. I actually thought she was going to console him, until she started breaking his fingers. One by one, she snapped the fingers on both of his hands with the calmness that just made no sense to me. You see, torture is common in hell, but there's always a purpose behind it. The people in Skin Street do it out of sadism, and the people in the Boneyard do it for their insane purification rituals. This woman did it without emotion and without reason. I honestly don't even know if she understood she was hurting him. I don't think her mind works the same way as ours. Eventually, the resident lost consciousness. A man can only take so much pain before the shock gets to him. Surely now she'd be satisfied, right? Surely she'd take his clothes and restore hell's order. No. She stood up, tilted her head slightly, and uttered a noise for the first time. It wasn't a victory cry, nor was it even a sigh of relief. Instead, she made a sound that was... well, it was little more than a faintly bemused, It was as if she couldn't comprehend why her plaything had stopped moving. She stood up and stepped away from him, apparently content to leave him alive, unconscious and crippled on the ground. She kept his club and didn't take his clothing. The cold and rain didn't seem to bother her either. And then she looked at me. In that instance, I knew I was looking at the Pale Witch. I looked into her eyes and I couldn't fucking move. I understood what she was straight away, and the sheer terror of it froze me. The Pale Witch isn't a Striga. She isn't a Gorgon. She isn't a succubus. The Pale Witch is a Cambion. It's hard to put into words exactly how paralyzing the sight of that Cambion is. That perfectly serene face and those dead, staring eyes just don't belong on a body that's otherwise human. It was like looking into the face of a mannequin and knowing it's looking back at you. And she made that damn noise again. That kind of detached curiosity shouldn't exist in the world of predator and prey. Might makes right, survival of the fittest. Nobody in the city of Dis has any right to make that noise. She took an awkward step towards me, and I saw her right leg was broken. It seemed that her fight with the resident had injured her after all. She just didn't notice it. She tried to walk normally, completely unaware that one of her legs had an extra joint. I don't care how tough you are. Nobody should be able to put their full weight onto a broken leg without wincing. She made that hum noise again. and she stepped closer, her zombie shuffle steadily closing the gap between us as I stared at her. She raised her club, and my survival instincts finally kicked into gear. Her transfixing spell broke just long enough for me to stumble backwards and avoid her swing. And I ran. I ran from a woman with a broken leg, and I'm not even ashamed of it. Looking back on my experience, there are some things I just can't comprehend. The Pale Witch is a Cambion, I'm certain of it. She was born in hell, and hell is all she's ever known. She also looked to be 30 years old. That just isn't possible. No baby survives long in Dis. Even if they had a tribe to protect them, there just isn't enough nourishment for an infant to grow into a toddler, let alone an adult. The Pale Witch is a walking impossibility. Her existence is a defiance of all reason. I would endure every torture the people of Skin Street and the Boneyard could conceive of if it meant that I never had to look into her eyes again.